Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very exciting to be here. And as I was saying to Andre earlier, it's very nice to be talking to a non-academic audience for a change. A short disclaimer to begin with. I'm here in my capacity as the policy analyst of the V-Dem Institute. So the research I present is the research of the Institute, but I'm also here in my capacity as an activist and as an individual. So some of the views you will hear today are my own views and are not necessarily shared by all my colleagues, of course. So on November 17, 1991, I joined my first ever demonstration. The day marked the mass uprising of university students at the Athens Polytechnic in 1973 and the beginning of the end of the 7-year military junta in Greece. The military regime followed the playbook of that time, abolishing civil liberties, dissolving all political parties, and had exiled, imprisoned, and tortured politicians, artists, citizens, on the basis of their political beliefs. So when I announced to my father I was taking part at the demonstration, he came back with a resounding, "No, don't even think about it," he said to me. "You will get into trouble with the police." I was 13 years old then. The march, for those of you who are familiar with Athens, followed the usual route, began in the Constitution Square, continued up Vasilissis Sophias Avenue, stopped outside the American Embassy for the annual chant about the role of the US Secret Service in installing the dictatorship in the first place, back then, and ended up at the Polytechnic with the police and young people rioting. Tear gas was thrown, a few arrests by the end of the evening. Every march commemorating the student uprising of 1973 has ended up in a riot and young people in hospitals. It is there to remind us that although much has been achieved in terms of democratic reforms, throughout the years, they have not nearly touched, or not as much touched, one of the most important institutions of the modern Greek state, which remains authoritarian. With this story, I want to draw attention to the importance of keeping memory alive. Marches for democracy in democracies are almost always about remembering how fragile ideas such as freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and the rule of law can be. Mass mobilizations, I think, project meaning to those otherwise quite abstract values and democratic ideals. Marches, protests, activism, and other forms of civic engagement perform another equally important role. They help shape political subjectivities. They become key moments in the process of an individual's formation of their political views, as they begin to understand deeper how they relate to governance and authorities. As people are brought into a position to stake claims, to have a voice, and to be recognizable by authorities, they begin to form as political subjects. Aristotle was utterly convinced that we are born political beings. And not only are we inescapably political, but also we enter into partnerships with others who have similar ideas about what is good. In this way, we form a kinonia politiki, a civil society. He goes on to argue that the purpose of civil society and that of the polis is to promote the common well-being. Now, the conditions for citizenship and participation in political life have, of course, changed dramatically since then. And the contemporary idea of civil society in its relation to democracy is a lot more complex than that. The early 90s was a period when both civil society and democracy activism experienced a great momentum. People literally marched through and on top of the ruins of the Berlin Wall. The role of the organized civil society in the transition to democracy was nowhere else as pronounced, I think, as in the case of the countries in Eastern Europe. That yearning for liberalization only marked the drive to be part of the European Union and the European integration project, to open up and into the civil liberties and comforts that many in the west of the wider Europe seemed to be enjoying at the time, at least. So the fact that there was more funding from private institutions available for civil society meant that civil society could quickly rise and try to fulfill that vision of being the bridge between understanding the developments at the political level and the population and their daily lives and concerns. After all, the memories of times when civil liberties and freedoms were not a given were still very raw. That sense of optimism and hope has waned in recent years. For one, the promise of a better life, of better living conditions for the many has not yet materialized. Yes, living standards have grown, did rise substantially, but inequality also grew sharply. And people care about freedoms, but they also care about their pockets. And some of the EU's policies, in terms of, for example, the economic model it promotes and the ideological obsession with hardening its external borders, have come to a huge cost, I think, in relation to its own image as a democratic entity and as a protector of rights. They have at least partly put meat in the bones of a rather exclusionary vision of the world. We are now at a point in many parts of wider Europe where social divisions have penetrated the fabric of civil society. You may have heard of the term politicization of civil society. In plain words, it means that civil society is losing its autonomy. This has implications both for the space for civic engagement, but also for democracy. Research shows that polarization weakens civil society's ability to rally around a cause, and its co-optation by elites prevents it from criticizing the government. And while research again shows that a robust civil society is not a prerequisite for democracy, it also shows that when autocrats want to rise, they most certainly start their job by curbing civil liberties and attacking civil society. Not outright banning, often because they want to keep the facade of a democracy, but weakening or co-optation, or both. So what is happening to democracy? There is a widespread consensus, at least among those who study democracy, that democracy is backsliding, or that countries are autocratizing. In V-Dem's report this year, the level of democracy we enjoy today is reported to be similar to the levels we enjoyed in the mid-1980s. Now, it does not mean that the same democratic qualities which were absent back then are also absent today. And this is especially true in Eastern Europe, given the scale of reforms that have taken place there. It does mean, however, that many democratic gains which have been achieved during the past years, and particularly since the 70s, the third wave of democratization, have been lost. So I wanted to pull up a few slides to illustrate this better. Thank you. At V-Dem, we speak of 4 types of regimes: liberal democracy, electoral democracy, electoral autocracy, and closed autocracy. And we also speak of processes of democratization and processes of autocratization. Democratization means that a country is making moves towards more democracy, regardless of its starting point. So it could be a liberal democracy becoming more democratic, or an electoral democracy becoming liberal democracy, and so on. And autocratization is the opposite. So it means it's losing its democratic qualities, becoming more autocratic, regardless of the starting point. I can have the next slide. There are 3 key messages in this report. The first one is that for the 15th consecutive year, so since 2009, the share of the world's population living in countries that are autocratizing, in other words, in countries whose democratic qualities are diminishing, is bigger than the number of people who live in countries that are democratizing, so whose democratic qualities are improving. This is 15 years in a row. The second important message, can I have the next slide? Okay, thank you. The second important message is that the data shows 42 countries as having experienced more than one episode of autocratization in 2023. And that's a steep increase from number 17, that was 50 years ago. Moreover, only 18 countries, there are only 18 countries that are democratizing in 2023. So when we say episode of autocratization, we mean periods of substantive decline in one or more democratic institutions. Out of these 42 countries, 28 were democracies to start with. Half of these democracies are surviving now, so only 15 of these countries remain democracies. We find 3 out of the 18 democratizing countries in Eastern Europe, but we also find 7 out of the 42 countries experiencing substantial decline also in the same region. This means that when democratic qualities begin to wane, some countries will eventually autocratize. So what happened to the other half, the democracies that did not die? So when we zoomed out and looked at a longer time frame, 70 years, more than half of autocratization cases within democracies have actually been reversed. To illustrate this potential for reversal, in last year's report, we looked at a shorter time frame of 10 years and discovered 8 cases where countries which were on a definite path towards autocratization managed to bounce back. 3 out of these countries are situated in the Eastern European region. Now, here comes the important bit. All the cases had the following in common: large-scale, popular mass mobilizations against the incumbent. That was present in 7 out of the 8 cases. The judiciary reversing the executive order. A unified opposition coalescing with civil society. The existence of critical elections and other key events that brought on the alteration of power. And in some small instances, international democracy and support. In other words, while more and more countries are losing their democratic qualities, there are also countries, but democracies in particular, that may reverse the trend, right, and remain democracies when certain characteristics are in place: mass mobilization, strong and autonomous civil society, and a strong judiciary. The third important message in the report is that the quality of elections is increasingly undermined. The figures we have show that the independence of the electoral management bodies, for instance, is deteriorating in at least half of the countries that are autocratizing. Now, if you drill down to the individual indicators we measure, you will find that for the past decade or so, pretty much the same declining indicators feature at the top 10 and 20 lists. Government censorship of the media is high up. Freedom of academic and cultural expression. free and fair elections, and civil society repression and the tightening of control of civil society organizations' existence. By now, we have a pretty clear indication that one of the main drivers behind autocratization today is the spread of disinformation and the way it fuels political polarization. Evidence demonstrates that disinformation increases during election periods, hence the attacks on the electoral management bodies. In a study done by International IDEA on disinformation and the information environment during electoral cycles, they find that voting periods are particularly targeted by disinformation. They also found that electoral management bodies are the target of disinformation attacks in 94% of the election cycle case studies. So this is a core institution for a functioning democracy. Disinformation also aggravates negative beliefs about fairness and transparency of elections. This has transpired in, for example, people not trusting the election result, yeah? And therefore it undermines the trust in the electoral process as a whole. In other words, the key democratic ideals of political participation and right to voting are being extremely undermined by the spread of disinformation. Research also shows that it is primarily anti-pluralist parties, so political parties that show evidence of weak commitments to democratic norms. These parties today are primarily found on the extreme right nationalist end of the spectrum that use this information to push societal and political polarization. So we find in our analysis that there is a vicious circle whereby the use of disinformation, homebred or foreign, aggravates polarization, which then leads anti-pluralist actors to rely on even more disinformation in order to keep the levels of polarization high. Because it helps their cause. They want societies divided. Polarization, both societal and political, is a major global trend, okay? And it affects all countries and all regime types, established democracies and autocratizing countries. In North America and Western Europe, polarization increased in countries such as Germany, Austria, Portugal, Spain, and the US. Polarization is rising in Serbia, Romania, Slovenia, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary. In addition, countries that recently experienced political crisis, such as Hong Kong, Myanmar, Tunisia, and Ukraine, stand out also in our measurements as countries with high levels of polarization. These divisions also manifest within civil society, yeah, as civil society becomes politicized. These sharp and exacerbated differences between social and political groups have nurtured the rise of populist movements. Right-wing populists started to frame civil society as the enemy. On the island of Lesbos, where I've done much of my research, and where much of the so-called migration crisis played out, the word NGO is, literally a swear word. Particularly in the field of migrant support, I think, the accusations that NGOs and civil society organizations embezzle taxpayers' money and their actions undermine the welfare state and law and order have really resonated with people. We have seen how rhetoric like this has successfully bolstered anti-pluralist parties in countries with very strong liberal democratic traditions like Sweden, France, and Austria. So we hear that the space for civil society is shrinking. Yeah, it does, and this is worrying. It's a worrying trend. If we consider that much of the research points to both an increase in what we call counter-civil society, as well as the literal tightening of control of civil society existence. But civil society is not only made up of formal organizations and NGOs. civil society was held, for example, as the protagonist of the Arab Spring. However, under conditions of authoritarianism, formal structures were not the obvious choice for civic engagement. During the demonstrations and uprising in Tunis, Algiers, Alexandria, Cairo, and so on, there were no obvious pro-liberal democracy slogans. Rather, political demands for liberalization were expressed along the lines of dignity, bread, and freedom. Unlike the Polish or the Czechoslovakian uprising in the 80s, or the student uprising against the dictatorship that I mentioned in the beginning, the Arab protests did not have recognizable and recognized leaders. It is widely accepted now among those researching social movements that social media and new technologies played a huge role in popularizing a type of activism based on individual contributions rather than on formal structures and ideological lines. In other words, while some spaces are closing, others are opening. Civil society is again under brutal attack in Tunisia, but they are not giving up. And although many voices in the West were quick to dub the struggles for democratic change in that part of the world as failed, and the Arabs as unsuited for democratic change and governance, the persistence of civil society and civic engagement shows that the fight for democratic ideals takes different forms in different parts of the world. And we are confronted with complex histories of colonization, imperialism, and so on. Let me conclude with some thoughts that I hope will be of relevance to your work here in the next few days. Now, back to our part of the world, the wider Europe. Restoring confidence and trust to representative institutions can be, I think, a strategic focus for civil society. And this is why civil society needs to remain independent and autonomous. And this, of course, links back to funding and the need for the EU to ensure there is sufficient funding for organizations that promote democratic values, given the generalized restrictions we see from national governments across the wider Europe. Civil society also needs strong legal protection from attacks, from harassment, from persecution and violence, which have seen an extraordinary rise in the EU itself. The judgment on the foreign funding law in Hungary is a very important step. A month ago, I participated in a workshop organized by the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency. So the EU Fundamental Rights Agency will base their upcoming civic space research and future areas of work on some of those discussions we had there with other NGOs and civil society members. I consider the involvement of the Fundamental Rights Agency to be a very promising development in the efforts to counter the shrinking of civil space. And I would encourage you to pay attention to their reports. There are many ways now in which civil society can and does work to defend democratic ideals. But if we want to be strategic about it, both organized civil society and informal groups and contributors should really need to rally behind the fight against disinformation. There are many, of course, who work on finding solutions and on what the role of civil society should be. A lot focused on the kind of comparative advantage civil society organizations have in understanding the local context and being able to debunk and pre-bank disinformation by providing the correct information to generalists and online communities, for instance. Last, defending democratic ideals is also very much a personal issue. If I'm asked to defend an ideal, I need to feel very strong about it. If I were asked to reflect on my own political subjectivity today in relation to my democratic ideals, I would resort to a whole new vocabulary. Yes, I defend democracy because I believe in the fundamental freedoms and want to exercise my rights. But I want democracy not to work just for me, but also because I defend migrant rights. Now, in democracies, migrants don't get to vote in national elections. Can we dare to imagine a democracy that gives migrants that kind of a voice? So what informs my understanding of what democratic society should look like is very much linked to my personal and professional choices, as well as my desire to be an engaged citizen. And in the next few days, I invite you to consider your own reasons for defending democracy, alongside the goals and aspirations of the organization with which you are affiliated to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evie. I think it works, the microphone. I don't know the program by heart. How much time do we have? Not much, eh? That was my idea as well. 10 minutes. 15 minutes, okay. For a Q&A, if there are any questions. Now, questions can be posed in either Russian or English. There will be translation. Anna has a microphone. Whom can I give the floor? Is there anyone who's already inspired enough to pose a question? Gentleman over there, do you?
Yes, thank you. I am András Lukács from the Clean Air Action Group, an environmental NGO from Hungary. You raised the, mentioned that it is very important to take action against the disinformation. Well, our organization has existed since 1988, and we had many discussions and about better communications, fighting against disinformation. But at the end of each discussion, we came to the conclusion that in order to have a real impact, we need much more money. So how to solve this problem for NGOs? Because without money, or with little money, you cannot really have a real impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your... Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Yes, money is the issue. Money is the issue, and as I mentioned, autonomy is also important. So this is, I think, the biggest puzzle, one of the big puzzles that you know, we need to solve. And this is why the support, I suppose, lobbying for more support from the national governments is very important. I cannot think of any more imaginative answer to give you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Natalia, and then...
Thank you for quite good presentation. Спасибо большое за презентацию. И мне хотелось бы задать вопрос. У вас указано на слайде, on this slide it was mentioned the right to entry to organizations, civil society organizations, and also to leave entrance and exit как separate rights to, I don't know, cooperate with civil society. Can you please additionally describe the right to leave the organizations or civil society organizations in general? How we can, I don't know, see it as a problem or as a right? For example, I can imagine how it works in Russia, for example. We can see a lot of new movement, like a pioneer organization. This is a movement of first for children, for example. And we can see a mass movement of children, school children who become a member of such organizations, but I'm not totally sure how it's possible to leave this organization openly, and how it works generally and not only in Russia.
I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but you're basically referring to the ability of, I was referring to the ability of the state to have a very tight control of what organizations are accepted and what not. Now, in a liberal democracy or in a strong democracy, the idea is that the state does not hold such tight control, that people are free to associate, to have this, and to form associations and to influence political life in that sense. I have not researched civil society, so I cannot give you examples from other places. Can you build up a little bit more on your question so I can understand a little bit better? The example you gave, for instance, from Russia, what is it that you consider to be problematic there? Oh, sorry, somebody else can ask.
There was someone in front of Natalia. You want to pose a question? Yes, sure. Anna, but I can explain. Are you going to explain? Yeah, maybe.
All right. Maybe. Okay, good.
I don't know if I'm wrong, so please correct me. Yes, but the question was, in my opinion, about the so-called uncivilized civil society, so just like, and when you just have organizations, Gongos or also NGOs organized so by the government, such big patriotic movements, just like what used to be said in Russia, and of course, so you can't you can enter the organizations, but you can't freely leave the organization, And also, it was another aspect was about that more and more children are involved, so in these policies of the government, So just how to tackle these things and how does it look like in other countries, not only in Russia. Am I correct? Okay.
Well, if anyone has ideas for answers in this question, because I am really not researching this, we're very welcome to answer, to give.
Thank you. I can tell from my own experience and from the experience of my organization. We were the first foreign agents in Russia, Russian American, it was our organization, not in Russia, sorry, in Petersburg. First in Moscow, there were several, but we were the first in Petersburg. And we decided that we should use legal ways of just insisting that we are not going to be this organization, foreign agent. And to continue working, the organization was frozen, not closed, and we applied to court, and we insisted that we are not going to continue being that organization. And certainly all these courts, no matter how good a lawyer we had who was presenting us, we lost everything we were supposed to lose in Russia, and our case moved to European court. And it took 5 years, and after 5 years, on the 24th of certain June, we received the information that we were the winners, and the country or the state lost, and what we were protected by that court, and certain amount of money we were to get. And the next day, our government announced that the court didn't mean anything to our government. So formally, we were the winners. In reality, we lost. And then we started that process of announcing that we were not foreign agents any longer, because this foreign agent organization coexisted with so-called, not, let's say, the organization with the same name, and we didn't hide that it was not that one which was the sleeping foreign agent. But again, we got the paper that that foreign agent somehow, let's call it metaphorically, died. We are not a foreign agent any longer. It was some 5 years ago, but we are still, even when we are mentioned in the press that we are not foreign agent and some business organization, they still insist that one's foreign agent is always a foreign agent, no matter that formally we are not. So that is something that has not been mentioned. That's why I took my time just to explain. And that is tremendously important not for our reputation. Our reputation is the same. With the state, we are enemies. With those for whom we continue working, we are not. But there are many, many obstacles, though formally we left that, I should say, noble man, name of foreign agents.
Thank you. Thank you. We have, was that a question? I think you were first. Yeah. Yeah, microphone. I have a loud voice. I'm a teacher. Yeah.
Thank you. For some context, I am from DL LGBT from Moscow. We came from Moscow. We will be returning to Moscow after that conference. And the question I have is mostly for you. It was very interesting to see the stats you provided with the research. And the question is following. Right now, in Russia specifically, we see that the alienation of LGBTQ community and the pushing of so-called traditional values on the society as a means of like creating a common enemy for the society. And this is in like our opinion, a authorization move, a move towards authorization. So my question is, in your opinion, is it a common theme in like current authorization practices in maybe different countries? If you have an input on that, it would be interesting to see that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I can speak a little bit about the country where I come from, which is now in the top list of autocratizers, at least in the V-Dem report, which is Greece. And that is definitely, there are definitely commonalities there, from not only from kind of promoting more traditional values, the role of the church also I think is really important in this, and the fact that they never really got to separate, I think, from the state. But there's also a very, if you like, obvious attack on organizations and individuals who try to promote the alternative values. The gay pride, for instance, in Thessaloniki, in the city where I come from, is so vilified by mainstream media, and that it really makes you wonder, you know, what kind of values they are trying to promote. When we look at when we talk in V-Dem at least about autocratization moves, yes, of course this is the more fine details that you are talking about now, but you know the kind of measurements that we do, you know, the surveys that we do talk about more, if you like, more general or more kind of high level concepts, like, you know, how much they attack the media, how much they attack existing institutions. And we do this globally. So there isn't, you know, a lot of, if you like, qualitative work behind that. It's very much a survey-based data. But yeah, definitely, we see that everywhere. And especially the attack on independent media. I think this is, across the board. Thank you.
I think we have reached almost the end. There are still a few hands raised. Shall I give one more? Yeah. Brief, please, if possible.
Спасибо большое. В продолжение вопроса, который прозвучал вот ранее, я хотела бы уточнить, вот традиционные ценности в России, они утверждены указом президента, как оказалось, там список традиционных ценностей. Вообще где-то в странах других эти ценности, они как в обществе уже сформировались, о них все знают, но они не зафиксированы, или они юридически как-то изложены, потому что в России пошли по этому пути. Спасибо.
Thank you for your comment. Sorry, I did not understand the question. No, that I am aware of. Not that I'm aware of, no. No.
Anna's raising her hand for a final comment or question. Then I give the floor back
Thanks
to
for helping
Barbara.
with the mic. And that's a fascinating outline for countries that are democratizing and autocratizing. And I, of course, wanted to ask about those that are democratizing. The both trends coexist, and that's, for me, a source of hope. So it's not going in one direction, it's going in both directions at the same time. And my question would be, which countries should we be watching that are democratizing at the moment? And of course, how important, if you have data on that, are citizens? Because this is about civil society here. So if you have, again, good examples of citizens' movements in places that are, or the role of the citizens in places that are democratizing, that'll be great to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Like that's another question. I probably don't have much substantial to say, but I think in the countries that we see now democratizing, I think one very interesting example is Moldova, and of course it's very tricky there. They are under immense pressure from Russia, and to go to another direction. But the support the current prime minister is getting is definitely very hopeful. And I think they're getting the support because they have the people behind them. I don't know exactly how organized the civil society is there. But I think Moldova is an example, and Macedonia is another example of a country that, is democratizing right now, and the people or mass mobilization and people movements are really important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evie. I was looking for a final comment, but unfortunately Anna stole it from me, because, I mean, there is nothing inevitable, of course, about autocratization or de-democratization, as your own statistics showed. Countries are able to jump back, so to speak, from de-democratization to a more democratic future. And one of the things you rightly emphasize, civil society is not a guarantee, but it's at least it's a precondition for democratization, so also for de-democratization. I'd like to thank you very much for giving our first presentation. This effectively ends the first session. Thank you very much. So after a round of applause, I give the floor back to Barbara.